to M328 Algebra 2 Pre-Calculus at Schaumburg High School. This video is going to help you understand about learning and grading in our classroom. Before we begin, we'll take a look at a few of the educators and consultants and authors that have influenced the practices in our classroom. Rick Wormelli is an expert that challenges teachers across the world to look at traditional education practices and decide if equal is always fair for students. Ken O'Connor, an educational consultant from Toronto, challenges teachers and school leaders to ask if the grades they're issuing meet these four conditions. Are they consistent, accurate, meaningful, and most of all, do they support student learning? Tom Guskey, a guest speaker we had in 2011 to District 211, began his career in Chicago Public Schools and now is a professor at the University of Kentucky. He asks teachers and schools to look and make sure their grading is for the sake of learning. He presents fixes for all broken grading practices and challenges teachers to remove traditional grading systems. One of my favorite books by Tom Guskey is On Your Mark. Doug Reeves, an expert in school reform, has inspired many teachers across the globe to remove negative and punitive grading practices from their classrooms. And Garnet Hillman, an instructional coach at Caruso Middle School in Deerfield, Illinois, was once a former world language teacher and is now an expert in grading and assessment practices. She personally works with teachers to help them make changes for student learning. So what's really wrong with grades anyways? Well, often they're inaccurate, complicated, subjective, and emotional. And there's very little research on traditional grades. The key word is traditional. Do we still use them because they're a tradition? Because grades are not essential for learning. Students do not need a grade to do learning. Some of the concerns with traditional grading practices include points and percentages. How are these points assigned to each problem or each assignment or assessment? Is it because we want the total to be 100, so we divide the points equally? Is one problem worth more than the other? But why? It often creates an environment where students can play a game to just earn enough points to reach a minimum percent. Averaging covers up a lack of understanding. Look at this, for example, 5 standards or skills that students need to know, and the percent of accuracy. Now, if we assume that that percent is actually true to the accuracy of understanding based on some subjective amount of points, this student knows quite a few things, but lacks understanding on solving quadratic equations. Overall, the average is 75%, something worth moving on. You can go on to the next class with that score. But the truth is that there's a deficit in solving quadratic equations that will come back to that student. In the next unit, in the next course, or a few courses later, it will catch up to them. Averages hide this. Punitive point loss and extra credit. Losing points for tardiness or other socioeconomic issues punishes students for a status that's out of their control. Extra credit for non-academic tasks is not even available to all students. One student may not be able to purchase the box of Kleenex for the teacher to earn those extra credit points that help their academic score. The issue with traditional grades is they try to cram too much into a single letter. The achievement, which is the standards and the skills that a student needs to know to be prepared to leave that class, get blended together with some behaviors, all of which are important in making students prepared for the real world and for their jobs and being a good citizen. Compliance, work habits, effort, attitude, punctuality, and participation are all very important. But when meshed together with standards and academics, how is one letter grade communicating all of that? Imagine your child is Mr. Messy and he keeps losing points for organization, when organization is only part of the assignment. What the truth is that Mr. Messy, he knows everything. He understands completely, but he's just a little sloppy. While little Miss Neat is earning extra credit for coloring within the lines and using glitter on her projects. Does she know as much as Mr. Messy, or does she just get extra points for being neat? Mr. Chatterbox in the back of the room keeps distracting students, and while that is an issue and it would be addressed, does he lose points if he knows everything? Or should we handle his chatterbox personality a little bit differently? Mr. Quiet is not raising his hand because he's not comfortable in that particular class, but he too is well aware of the content and doing a great job performing on individual assessments. But his grade is suffering because he doesn't participate. We've already discussed Little Miss Late. And Mr. Nervous? Boy, he's losing points because you gave him a pop quiz. And that made him anxious, and he wasn't able to demonstrate everything he understood in that moment because he was surprised and anxious. Parents ask this question of their teachers all the time. What is my son's grade? I'd like to challenge them and ask, what they really want to know is, what does my son understand? What does my son still need to learn? And is my son doing everything he needs to do to learn everything he's supposed to? These are important questions, and I challenge you to ask yourself and ask your students these questions. If you're told that your son has an 83%, what information do you receive from that? You may translate that to, he's got a B, everything's okay, but what does it really mean? How is it supposed to be interpreted? That he earned 83% of those subjectively aligned points? That he knows 83% of the material? Or maybe he knows 66% of the material but completed 100% of the homework. Is that student prepared to move on? Consider this. What if the homework grade was really just completion and not understanding? What's important here is that we can separate achievement from behavior. We can assign a letter grade that represents the achievement the student has on their academic skills, meanwhile reporting behavior separately. Communicating behavior to parents and to students and counselors and coaches is very important in developing good citizens with good work habits. But reporting their achievement in a separate letter grade will identify whether or not a student is prepared to move forward academically. Communicating learning in our classroom. Written feedback will be given on all assessments. A separate rubric score will be given to each learning standard covered on an assessment to communicate the student's understanding on each part of the assessment. In this case, there would be 3 scores because there were 3 standards given. In a study done by Dylan Williams in 1988, 132 students were separated into 3 groups. In the beginning of the course, students were given a pretest, and we were looking for growth across the course after assessments were graded. Some assessments were graded using a mark only. That mark would be a letter, a percent, a number, a score. Others received a mark and some written feedback from the teacher. And the third group received written feedback only. Educators were astonished to learn the results. For those that received marks only, there was no improvement from the beginning pretest to the post-test at the end of the course. For those that received marks and written feedback, there was also no improvement. The only students who had improvement were those that received written feedback from their instructors and direction on how to move forward in their learning. There was an average of 30% improvement for those students. For that reason, feedback is going to be a huge part of the learning and assessment cycle in the course. Students will be presented with the standards and skills and resources to become proficient. Some standards are classified as primary and others as secondary. The classification is based on the longevity of the skills, the alignment to other courses, and the application. Students will receive instruction, in-class practice time, practice outside of class, and additional support opportunities. Formative checkpoints or quizzes will receive only feedback and no score and will offer redirection for the students. Students will be journaling their feedback, essentially creating a personalized study guide for themselves. Students should take the opportunity to relearn and correct misunderstandings before a summative assessment. These steps are repeated until all standards in a unit are taught and formatively assessed. Summative assessments, or a test, will assess all standards including the skills of a unit. Each standard on the summative assessment will receive a separate rubric mark. Feedback will also be given to those students that still need to continue to learn a particular standard. Marks will be recorded on Infinite Campus separately and in categories labeled Summative Primary and Summative Secondary. These are the marks that will be used. Students receiving a 4 or a 3 will have reached or exceeded the necessary proficiency by demonstrating understanding and consistent evidence. Students who receive a 2 have not yet met proficiency where evidence is inconsistent in demonstrating their understanding. Students who receive a 1 have shown little evidence towards making progress of proficiency on that particular standard. A 0 just shows that a student has not yet assessed. This can often happen when a student is absent. For those students who receive anything below a 3, so that would be a 2, a 1, or a 0, they have not yet mastered or meet proficiency on that standard, and reassessment is necessary. Reassessment opportunities are available for all students and are a requirement of students that receive less than a 3 on a summative primary standard. You need to refer to Infinite Campus to see if the standards are primary or secondary. Failure to reassess and reach proficiency on these standards will result in course failure. Students can meet with the teacher, attend the Saxon Academic Center, complete extra practice, and then reassess the standards needed. Coming back to the rubric, it's important to point out that these are not a translation 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 to a traditional letter system. We are not replacing A, B, C, D, F with 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. It is not equivalent. A 2 does not equal a C. A student who receives 2s has not yet met the proficiency on the standard. Their evidence is inconsistent and they should not be moving forward. That means that they need to go back. The same thing goes with the 1. Little evidence of making progress towards meeting proficiency does not equate to a D or an F. And the same goes for the 4 and the 3. The 0 does mean an incomplete because they have not completed the assessment yet. In-progress grades will be posted on Infinite Campus in their own category after summative assessments and reassessments. Traditional grades may lag. What does that mean? It means that if students are taking a little bit longer to learn something because they need to go back and reassess after a summative assessment, then their desired grade may take longer to achieve. The grade you see at Infinite Campus will change when that student relearns the concepts and reassesses to show their understanding. Learning is going to be the focus in our class. You will be communicated with regularly about what your student has learned and what they still need to learn. If you learn, the grade will follow. Here are some links and websites and books that will help you follow along with some of the practices happening in our classroom this year. Thank you, and I look forward to learning with your students.